The courtroom was hushed, as if the walls themselves held their breath. A sea of faces leaned forward, waiting for the sentence that would seal a man's fate. And then, a sound that did not belong in such a solemn place. Tiny shoes clicking against polished wood, all eyes turned toward the source. A little girl, no more than 6, walked with unshaken courage toward the bench where Judge Eleanor Price sat in her wheelchair. The judge, dignified but weary, had been bound to that chair for 3 long years. After an accident that had stolen her, once vibrant life as a dancer, she was used to silence. She was used to control. She was used to order. But she was not used to this. The child, Grace. Hall stopped. She lifted her chin and spoke in a voice so pure it carried to the back row. "Judge lady, if you free my daddy, I'll help you walk again." Gasps, laughter, whispers cut like wind through the gallery. Some leaned away, shaking their heads. Others smirked at the child's impossible claim, yet others stared in disbelief, unsure whether to mock or to marvel. Judge Eleanor, however, did not laugh, her gaze fixed on the girl's wide blue eyes. Eyes that glowed with a confidence untouched by cynicism. For the first time in years, the judge felt something stir, in the hollow space where hope used to live. Would you have laughed at her, too? Or would you have wondered just for a moment whether the impossible might breathe inside a child's promise? Stay with us, because what unfolded over the weeks that followed was not just a trial about theft. It was a trial about love against fear, about justice against law, and about a community learning what it means to believe again. If stories like this move you, subscribe now to Black Voices Justice so you'll never miss the moments where truth, hope, and courage collide. By the end, you will see why some promises cannot be dismissed because they carry the weight of miracles. 3 weeks before that shocking moment, Marcus Hall was just another man in a fading work jacket, rising at 5 a.m. to scrape together a living. A mechanic by trade, his hands were stained with grease that never washed away. He carried more than tools. He carried the grief of losing his wife too soon, and the heavy responsibility of raising Grace alone. Grace was not like other children, born with a heart condition. She grew up fragile but fierce. Cold nights often left her struggling for breath, her tiny chest rattling as if every inhale might be her last. Marcus knew those sounds better than any lullaby. He had spent countless hours cradling her in his arms, whispering promises that tomorrow would be brighter. But promises alone could not buy medicine. The pills and treatments Grace needed were priced beyond a laborer's wage. Marcus sold his car. He sold his wedding ring. Even his watch, a gift from his father, vanished into the hands of a pawnbroker. Yet the bills kept climbing, and his pockets grew emptier. Then came the night Grace's skin burned with fever, her lips pale, trembling. Marcus touched her forehead and felt terror ice through his veins. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice thin as thread. "I can't breathe." Panic clawed at him. He called his employer, begged for an advance, but rules were rules. No money before payday. He thought of the pharmacy just blocks away, shelves lined with what could save her. He thought of the empty wallet in his pocket. He thought of his little girl, slipping away while he obeyed a system that cared nothing for her gasps. And so, Marcus made the choice he swore he never would. He pulled on his old jacket, kissed Grace's damp forehead, and stepped into the cold night. The fluorescent glow of the pharmacy beckoned like salvation. Inside, families picked up prescriptions. Cashiers counted bills. A weary pharmacist rang up order after order. Marcus's heart thundered. He found the bottles Grace needed, medicine that cost more than he earned in 2 days. His hand shook as he slipped them into his coat. Every nerve screamed at him to stop. He was no thief, but he was a father. He almost made it to the door. Almost. Oh, hand gripped his shoulder. A security guard with kind eyes but a firm voice. "Sir, please empty your pockets." The world collapsed around him. Marcus could have run, but he didn't. With tears streaming, he handed over the medicine. "Please," he whispered. "My little girl is dying. I swear I'll pay you back. Just let me take it to her." But mercy was not written in the guard's orders. Sirens wailed. Neighbors stared. Handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists as he was shoved into the back of a patrol car. And in that moment, one truth became clear. Sometimes, doing the right thing makes you a criminal. Would you have done differently? Or would you too have stolen hope? For your child? The news of Marcus Hall's arrest spread faster than winter wind through the small town. By morning, whispers turned into headlines. A father caught stealing, a little girl left alone. Neighbors shook their heads at the scandal. But in the apartment across from the Halls, one person did more than whisper, Mrs. Mildred, an elderly widow with frail hands and a soft heart, found Grace crying on the couch, her cheeks streaked with tears, her small body trembling. "Come here, child," Mildred said, wrapping her in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. Grace clung to her, asking the only question she knew, "Where's Daddy?" Mildred swallowed hard. She could not bring herself to tell the truth, that Marcus sat in a cell for trying to save her. So instead, she whispered, "He's fighting for you, sweetheart. And you're not alone." But in truth, Marcus was very alone. The concrete walls of the county jail were colder than any winter night. He sat on a narrow cot, his head in his hands, his thoughts circling back to Grace's pale face, and whispered, plea for air. He wasn't thinking of theft. He wasn't thinking of punishment. He was thinking of whether his daughter had survived the night. 2 weeks later, the day of the trial arrived. The courthouse stood like a fortress, its marble pillars casting long shadows across the steps. Inside, the air buzzed with curiosity. Some came to condemn Marcus. Others came to support him, whispering that no good father should be punished for doing what the system refused to do. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in a suit borrowed from a church neighbor. His eyes were red from nights without sleep, his hands trembling as he twisted a worn handkerchief. At the bench, Judge Eleanor Price rolled her wheelchair into position. Her presence commanded silence. Though she could not stand, her authority filled the room like thunder. "All rise," the bailiff called. The irony did not go unnoticed. Everyone stood except the judge herself. And yet, she carried herself taller than anyone else in the chamber. The prosecutor, Daniel Cole, wasted no time. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, polished. "This case is simple. Theft is theft. If we allow emotions to override justice, we invite chaos. Mr. Hall threatened store security and attempted to walk away with merchandise worth over $100. The law cannot bend for tears." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The word threatened hung in the air like a brand on Marcus's name. His lawyer, Rosa Martinez, rose slowly. She was underpaid, overworked, and carrying a folder of notes that looked too thin to stand against the state. "Your Honor," Rosa said, her voice steady though her hands trembled, "Marcus Hall is not a criminal. He is a father who has given everything for his daughter. He sold his belongings, begged his employer, sought every honest option before desperation drove him to one mistake. This is not a case about greed. It is about survival." Judge Eleanor listened, her face unreadable. Her fingers rested on the polished wood of the bench, her expression cool, her mind measured. She had heard countless pleas before, excuses, explanations. Every defendant had a story, and yet, something about this one made the silence in her courtroom feel heavier. Marcus finally stood to speak, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to steal. I never have before, but my little girl, she couldn't breathe. I couldn't just sit there and watch her die. If that makes me guilty, then I am guilty. But I am guilty of loving her too much to let her go." Some in the crowd wiped tears, others scoffed. Muttering that rules were rules, Daniel Cole smirked. Certain the law was on his side, Judge Eleanor lifted her gavel. Her lips parted to deliver what seemed the inevitable verdict. And then the doors of the courtroom groaned open. Every head turned. Mrs. Mildred appeared, walking slowly, holding the hand of a little girl with bright blue eyes. Grace. The child's gaze swept the room, wide with awe at the towering walls, the rows of strangers, the solemn faces, and then she saw him. Her father. "Daddy!" she cried, running forward before the bailiff could stop her. Gasps filled the air again. Marcus fell to his knees as Grace flung herself into his arms. He held her tight, his shoulders shaking with sobs he could no longer contain. "I'm so sorry, baby," he whispered into her hair. "Daddy made a mistake. A big one." Grace pulled back, her small hands cupping his face. "It's okay, Daddy. You were just trying to help me." The room softened. Even hardened spectators blinked away tears. And for the first time that day, Judge Eleanor's stern mask cracked. She leaned forward, her voice steady but quiet. "Let the child remain with her father." The gavel lowered softly, not in judgment but in allowance. Grace's presence had shifted the air. The trial was no longer about evidence and statutes. It had become about something deeper, something the law books never mentioned. And question now echoed through every heart in that chamber. What would this little girl say next? The courtroom seemed to freeze in place. Every eye followed the small figure as Grace Hall stepped away from her father's embrace. Her shoes tapped lightly against the wooden floor, each sound magnified in the silence. The bailiff moved instinctively to block her path, but Judge Eleanor Price raised a hand. "Let her speak," she said softly. And so Grace walked, unshaken, unafraid, toward the bench. Her dress hung loose on her small frame. Her hair was untamed, a halo of brown wisps around her determined face. When she reached the towering desk, she placed both palms on the polished wood and lifted her chin. The room leaned forward. "Judge Lady," she began, her voice clear, carrying far beyond what seemed possible for such a small child. "My daddy is a good man. He didn't steal because he wanted to. He stole because I was sick. He loves me so much that he would do anything, even break the rules." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in sympathy, others frowned, shaking their heads as if to say the law is the law. Judge Eleanor folded her hands. "I understand, sweetheart," she replied gently, "but your father still broke the law, and laws are what keep order." Grace nodded solemnly, as if she understood every word. But then her gaze dropped to the judge's wheelchair. The silence grew thick. "Judge Lady," Grace said softly, "I can see that your legs don't work, and I can see that it makes you very sad inside." Gasps burst from the gallery. A child speaking to a judge this way? It was unthinkable. Yet Grace's words carried no malice, only truth. Marcus stiffened, panic in his eyes, ready to call his daughter back. But Judge Eleanor raised her chin, swallowing hard. The words pierced deeper than any lawyer's argument, because they were true. Grace leaned closer, lowering her voice so it rang with intimacy. "My daddy told me that when people are hurt, sometimes they forget how to see love. I think that happened to you. Judge Lady, but I can help." The courtroom erupted in disbelief. Some people laughed outright. Others whispered that the girl was confused or delusional. The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Objection!" Daniel Cole snapped. "This is absurd. A child cannot heal paralysis. This has no place in a courtroom." But Judge Eleanor did not silence Grace. She was transfixed, her heart pounding in a rhythm she had not felt in years. Grace reached forward, her small hand brushing against Eleanor's motionless fingers. "Please," she whispered, "if you let my daddy go home with me, I promise I will help your legs work again." The gavel slammed down. "Order!" Eleanor's voice thundered through the chamber, but even as she demanded silence, she could not tear her eyes from the child. For 3 years, every doctor had told her the same thing. Impossible. Her spinal cord was damaged beyond repair. Her future would be wheels and dependence. And yet, when this small hand touched hers, she felt something she could not explain. A warmth, a tingling, a spark. What if? The question echoed louder than the laughter around her. What if the impossible was not as impossible as she had believed? The courtroom quieted once more, though tension still crackled in the air. Grace stepped back, her blue eyes glowing with certainty. "I'm not asking you to believe me right now," she said. "I'm asking you to give me a chance. If you let my daddy come home, I'll prove it. I'll show you that miracles can happen when people love enough." The prosecutor shook his head in outrage. "This is madness, Your Honor, madness!" But the gallery was split. Some looked on with hope, their eyes damp with tears. Others crossed their arms, muttering about nonsense and wasted time. Marcus stood frozen, torn between pride and terror. His daughter had shifted the ground beneath them all. If the judge listened, there was hope. If she didn't, his future was already written. This was the moment the trial stopped being about evidence. It was no longer just about medicine stolen or laws broken. It was about whether one woman, bound by duty and by a wheelchair, would allow herself to believe in something beyond the reach of reason. Would you have believed her? Or would you have laughed, like so many in that room? Judge Eleanor Price sat frozen, her hand still tingling where Grace's touch had rested. The room buzzed with noise, murmurs, laughter, protests. But inside the judge's chest, there was only silence, a silence filled with memories she had spent 3 years trying to bury. The accident, the twisted metal, the sound of sirens, the words, "You will never walk again." She had lived those words like a prison sentence, chaining herself to her work because it was the only place she still held power. But now, a 6-year-old girl had looked past the black robes and seen something no one else dared to name: her sadness. Could a child really see so deeply? Or had loneliness carved her soul so thin that even a whisper of hope felt like healing? "Your Honor," Daniel Cole pressed, his voice sharp, dragging her back. "This is beyond irregular. We cannot allow court proceedings to turn into circus acts. The defendant must be sentenced according to the law." Judge Eleanor's lips tightened. The law. Yes, the law was clear. Theft was theft. Intentions did not erase crime. And yet, the echo of Grace's words gnawed at her reason. Sometimes when people are hurt, they forget how to see love. Her gaze drifted to Marcus Hall, still kneeling with his daughter in his arms. He looked broken, yet whole in the only way that mattered: his love for the child who believed in him without hesitation. And then her eyes returned to Grace, standing so small yet so unshaken, as if she were the only person in the room who knew how this story should end. For a long moment, Eleanor did not speak. The gavel rested beneath her palm, heavy with the weight of decisions. She could slam it down, end the nonsense, and return to the safe certainty of the law, or she could take a step into the unknown, where reason faltered and faith began. The crowd shifted restlessly. Every second of silence stretched like hours. Finally, Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "Miss Hall," she said, "you understand the seriousness of what you've promised?" Grace nodded without hesitation. "I do. I always keep my promises." "And you truly believe you can help me walk again?" Grace's eyes sparkled. "I don't just believe it, I know it." The gallery gasped. The prosecutor nearly shouted again, but Eleanor silenced him with a raised hand. Her mind, usually a fortress of logic, felt suddenly like a battlefield, law and love clashing in every corner. Was she losing her judgment? Or was she finally finding it? The air grew thick with expectation. Marcus held his breath, tears caught in his lashes. Rosa Martinez, his attorney, looked at the judge as if she too sensed history bending in this moment. And then Judge Eleanor did something she had never done in 20 years on the bench. She set aside the script. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were clear. "Mr. Hall, you have committed a crime. Under normal circumstances, I would sentence you to jail and fines. But today, something has been placed before this court that cannot be ignored. Your daughter has made me an offer, and I am willing to give her a chance." Gasps swept the room. Daniel Cole sprang to his feet, his face flushed. Your Honor, this undermines the very foundation of justice. No, Mr. Cole, Eleanor replied sharply. This expands it. In 30 days, we will know whether her promise is empty or extraordinary. Until then, Mr. Hall, you are free to return home with your daughter. The courtroom erupted in shouts, astonishment, outrage, disbelief. The bailiff called for order, but the chaos only deepened. Some cheered, some jeered, some simply stared as if they had witnessed a crack in reality itself. Marcus covered his face, overwhelmed. Grace slipped her hand into his, whispering, "See, Daddy? Everything's going to be okay." But Eleanor was not finished. Her gavel tapped once more, commanding silence. "However," she added, her tone suddenly sharp, "if your daughter fails to fulfill her promise, you will return here to face not only the original charges, but also additional ones. Understand this clearly. 30 days is all you have." The weight of her words fell heavy. Marcus nodded, his joy tempered by dread. If Grace failed, the punishment would be even harsher. But the little girl squeezed his hand, her blue eyes fierce with certainty. "Don't worry, Daddy. Miracles happen when love is stronger than fear." And so the trial ended not with a verdict, but with a gamble placed in the hands of a child. As the crowd spilled into the streets, divided between hope and disbelief, one question lingered in every mind. Had they just witnessed the beginning of a miracle? The courthouse doors closed behind them, but the echo of Judge Eleanor's ruling followed Marcus and Grace into the night. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors whispered, and strangers stared. Some looked at Grace as though she were an angel. Others looked at her as though she were dangerous. Marcus said nothing. He just held his daughter's hand as tightly as if she might disappear. His freedom felt fragile, as if a single breath could shatter it. 30 days. 30 days to prove the impossible. Back in their small apartment, the silence was heavy. Marcus cooked a simple dinner, though his hands shook as he stirred the pot. Grace hummed quietly at the table, swinging her legs as if the trial had been just another ordinary day. Finally, Marcus sat across from her. "Sweetheart," he began carefully, "about what you told the judge today." Grace looked up, her spoon paused in midair. "You're worried," she said matter-of-factly, "because you don't see my gift yet." Marcus blinked. "Gift? Grace, you've never healed anyone before." Her expression softened into something wiser than her years. "Do you remember Mrs. Mildred's back?" Marcus frowned, recalling how their elderly neighbor had been bedridden with pain. She said she couldn't move for a week. "But then you visited her." Grace nodded. "I told her a story about a garden where flowers sing." I held her hand. "The next day she could walk again." Marcus rubbed his temples. "That was coincidence." "And what about Tommy Peterson's arm?" Grace pressed. "The doctor said 6 weeks. But after I drew him a superhero with strong arms and told him it would heal fast, it got better in 3. Marcus remembered that too. He had laughed it off, never connecting it to Grace. But helping someone's back or a broken arm is very different from, his voice faltered, from making a woman walk again after 3 years. Grace leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Daddy, Judge Price's legs aren't broken. They're just asleep." When I touched her hand, I felt her sadness. "That's what keeps her from walking." Marcus stared at her, torn between wonder and fear. She spoke with such certainty that he almost believed. But if she was wrong, the price was more than he could bear. Across town, Judge Eleanor sat alone in her home office. The quiet hum of the city drifted through her window, but her mind was louder than any street noise. She opened her laptop, trying to focus on case files, but every word blurred. Instead, she saw Grace's blue eyes. She felt the warmth of that tiny hand, and she remembered something she had not felt in 3 years. A spark in her legs. Faint, but undeniable. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Jonathan Reed, her longtime physician. "Catherine." His voice was gentle but firm. "I heard what happened in court today. The whole town is talking. Eleanor closed her eyes. I'm sure they are. Listen, he continued, I care about you. Please don't get caught up in false hope. Your injury is permanent. That child, no matter how sweet, cannot change that. Eleanor hesitated. Jonathan, what if it isn't only physical? What if the body follows the spirit? What if healing isn't just about nerves and bones? There was silence on the line, then a sigh. Catherine, you're tired. You're vulnerable. Don't let desperation blind you. Please, be careful. After the call ended, Eleanor sat still, her heart pounding. Perhaps Jonathan was right. But perhaps he wasn't. The next morning, Marcus took Grace to the park. She ran toward the swings, her laughter bright against the gray sky. Marcus sat on a bench. Watching her, he noticed something he had missed before. Every time a child fell, scraped a knee, or burst into tears, Grace was the first to run over. She would kneel, whisper something, give a hug or a touch, and almost like magic, the crying stopped. Children went back to play as though nothing had happened. She's special, a voice said beside him. Marcus turned. An old man with kind eyes sat on the neighboring bench, watching Grace. I've been coming to this park for years, he said. I've never seen a child like her. My grandmother used to call it the gift. The gift? Marcus asked. The old man nodded. Some are born with it. Not medicine, not science. Just the power to heal with love and belief. Marcus looked back at Grace. She was helping a little boy who had tripped, smiling as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Could it be real? Could love itself carry power? Or was this all just kindness dressed up as miracles? The question lingered as the day faded, and though Marcus still feared the future, a seed had been planted. Maybe, just maybe, his daughter's gift was more than a child's imagination. But was belief enough to stand against the ticking clock of 30 days? The following afternoon, Judge Eleanor Price did something she had not done in years. She left her office not for the courthouse, but for the park on Maple Street. Grace had asked to meet her there, not with your judge clothes, not with your serious judge face, just you. The request had disarmed Eleanor more than any argument ever had. And so, for the first time since the accident, she wore a simple blue dress. With no robe to shield her, she wheeled herself down the path with hands that trembled more from nerves than from effort. The pond came into view, glimmering in the afternoon sun. There sat Grace, wearing a yellow sundress, scattering breadcrumbs for a flock of eager ducks. Marcus lingered on a bench nearby, his watchful eyes never straying too far. "Judge lady," Grace called, waving with unfiltered joy. "Come feed the ducks with me." Eleanor found herself smiling, a reflex she had almost forgotten. She rolled closer, and Grace poured breadcrumbs into her hand. "Here," the child said. "They're really hungry today." For the next hour, something remarkable happened. The stern judge, who had built walls around her heart, laughed. She laughed at ducks squabbling for crumbs. She listened to Grace's imaginative stories about each duck's secret life, and when one bold duck climbed onto the wheel of her chair, Eleanor felt a burst of laughter she hadn't released in 3 years. As the ducks drifted back across the pond, Grace turned serious. "Judge lady," she asked, "what was your favorite thing to do before the accident?" Eleanor's smile faltered. She stared at the rippling water. "I used to dance," she said quietly. "Ballet when I was a child, and later just for joy. I would dance in my kitchen, in the living room, anywhere. It made me feel alive." Grace clapped her hands. "I love dancing too. Do you miss it?" Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "Yes, I miss it every day." Grace stood, her little arms outstretched. "Then dance with me. Right now." Eleanor shook her head, pain twisting her features. "Sweetheart, I can't. My legs—" "You don't need legs to dance," Grace interrupted, smiling. "Your arms can dance. Your head can dance. Your heart can dance. Let me show you." She twirled slowly, arms gliding through the air like ribbons, feet barely moving. Then she beckoned Eleanor. At first, Eleanor hesitated, but then she lifted her arms, tentative at first, then freer. She let her shoulders sway, her head tilt. The movements were awkward, yet graceful in their own way. And in that moment, something shifted. For the first time in 3 years, Eleanor felt the music of life pulsing through her again. Her chest expanded with laughter. Tears streamed down her face. "You're dancing, Judge Lady," Grace cried, spinning with joy. "You're really dancing!" Eleanor's arms moved more boldly, flowing with Grace's rhythm. The park, the ducks, the world itself seemed to vanish. There was only movement, and the freedom it carried. When at last they stopped, Eleanor's cheeks were wet but glowing. She looked at Grace in wonder. How did you make me feel alive again?" Grace knelt by her wheelchair, placing small hands on her knees. "Your legs are sleeping," she said softly. "They're not broken. They're just waiting for your heart to wake up." Eleanor stared at her, overwhelmed. She couldn't feel Grace's touch physically. Yet somehow she sensed it. A warmth, a presence, something words could not capture. "My spirit?" Eleanor whispered. "You're saying it's my spirit that's asleep?" Grace nodded firmly. "And I think it's already starting to wake up. Didn't you feel it when we were dancing?" Eleanor's breath caught. Yes, she had felt it, a lightness she thought was gone forever. Grace beamed. "Tomorrow, come back. We'll feed the ducks again. We'll dance again. And I'll tell you more stories about all the beautiful things waiting for you to remember them." Eleanor nodded slowly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Yes, Grace. I'll come back tomorrow." As she wheeled away from the park, Eleanor felt something startling. For the first time since the accident, she was looking forward to tomorrow. The weight she had carried for 3 years felt lighter, replaced by a fragile, glowing hope. But across the street, unseen by her, an ambulance raced past, its siren a warning. That night, everything would be tested. That evening, the park was quiet. The ducks had gone still, ripples fading on the pond, but not far away. Wheels slipped against damp earth. Judge Eleanor Price had stayed later than she intended. Grace's laughter still echoed in her ears as she replayed the dance they had shared. For the first time in years, she had felt joy, not borrowed, not forced, but real. She turned her wheelchair toward the exit. But a patch of uneven ground betrayed her. The chair tipped sharply to the side. There was a gasp, a cry for help, then silence as Eleanor struck the ground. By the time the ambulance arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Marcus rushed to the scene, his heart pounding as he pushed through the onlookers. All he saw was Eleanor, pale and still. As paramedics lifted her carefully onto a stretcher, her eyes were closed. Blood stained her temple. "Is she alive?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking. "She's breathing," one paramedic replied, "but she's unconscious. Severe concussion. We have to move fast." Grace tugged at her father's hand, her eyes calm in a way that unnerved him. "Daddy," she whispered, "this is the test. This is when we find out if miracles are really real." At the hospital, fluorescent lights buzzed above the crowded waiting room. Marcus sat hunched in a plastic chair, gripping Grace's small hand. Around them, townspeople had gathered, whispering anxiously. The case had become a story that belonged to everyone now, an entire community held hostage by the fate of one judge and one little girl. Dr. Jonathan Reed appeared through the double doors, his face grave. "She has a serious head injury," he announced. "A concussion. She's been unconscious for 2 hours. The next 24 hours are critical. She must wake soon or—" He didn't finish, but everyone knew what he meant. Gasps and murmurs swept the room. Marcus buried his face in his hands, his heart breaking. If Eleanor didn't wake, not only would she be lost, but he and Grace would face consequences harsher than before. Yet when he looked down, Grace's face was steady. "Daddy, she's scared. Her spirit is lost again. I have to help her find her way back." Dr. Reed knelt before the child, his tone gentle but unyielding. "Sweetheart, Judge Price is very sick. She can't have visitors right now." Grace shook her head. "She doesn't need visitors. She needs me. Her spirit won't hear anyone else." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Grace, maybe we should wait." "Maybe—" But she pulled free. her eyes blazing with certainty. "Daddy, remember what Mommy used to say? The hardest times are when miracles happen, because that's when people need them most." The room went silent. Dozens of strangers stared at this little girl speaking with the authority of someone far older. Some were skeptical, some were hopeful, and some looked as if she was the only chance left. Then another voice joined. "Let her. Try." Heads turned. Daniel Cole, the prosecutor, stood at the edge of the crowd. His usual sharpness was gone, replaced by weariness and something that looked almost like humility. "Mr. Cole?" Marcus asked, astonished. "I came when I heard about the accident," the prosecutor admitted. "For days, I've tried to dismiss what happened in court as nonsense. But Judge Price has never let her emotions decide a case. And yet she believed in your daughter. If she believed, maybe I should too." He turned to Dr. Reed. "Is there really any harm in letting the girl see her?" The doctor hesitated. Rules were rules. Children weren't allowed in intensive care. But every pair of eyes in the room fixed on him. Desperate, his medical training screamed no, yet his heart whispered something else. At last, he exhaled. 5 minutes, he said quietly. "The child can have 5 minutes, but she must be accompanied by adults." Marcus dropped to his knees, pulling Grace into his arms. "Sweetheart, are you sure? This is dangerous. If you can't—" Grace pressed her tiny hands against his cheeks, silencing him. "Don't worry. Daddy. I know the way to bring her back." The double doors swung open. Dr. Reed led Marcus and Grace down a long white corridor. The air thick with antiseptic. Machines beeped faintly from behind closed doors. At the end of the hall, they stopped. Room 214. Inside, Eleanor lay pale and motionless. Her face was almost unrecognizable without its usual strength. Tubes and wires tethered her to the machines that kept rhythm with her fragile life. Marcus froze in the doorway, grief clawing at him. But Grace walked forward, climbing onto a chair beside the bed so she could reach Eleanor's arm. She placed her hand gently on the judge's skin. "Hello, Judge lady," she whispered. "I know you can't hear me with your ears right now, but maybe you can hear me with your heart." The monitors beeped steadily. The room held its breath. The room was silent except for the steady hum of machines. Grace kept her small hand on Judge Eleanor's arm, her voice calm and clear. "I know you're scared," she whispered. "When you fell, it reminded you of the accident. It made your spirit hide again, like it did 3 years ago." Marcus stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his fists clenched. Dr. Reed hovered near the monitors, eyes skeptical but unwilling to interrupt. "But Judge lady," Grace continued, "do you remember the pond? Do you remember feeding the ducks with me? Do you remember how it felt when we danced, even though your legs didn't move? You were happy then. That happiness is still inside you. It's just hiding." Her voice was gentle, almost like a lullaby. "I can see the path back to the light," Grace whispered. "It's made of all your memories, dancing as a little girl, becoming a judge, helping people, laughing with me. You are more than this bed, more than these machines. Please, come back." Dr. Reed's eyes flicked to the monitor. For the first time in hours, Eleanor's heart rhythm steadied. He leaned closer, his professional mask cracking. "Her vitals are responding," he murmured. "But that's impossible." Marcus swallowed hard, a tear sliding down his cheek. He had prayed for strength, for hope, but never imagined it would come from the lips of his 5-year-old daughter. Grace closed her eyes and pressed both hands on Eleanor's arm. The room seemed to warm, as if a golden glow filled the space. Marcus blinked. Was it real, or just his imagination? "Your spirit isn't broken," Grace said firmly. "It's just lost in the dark. But I can guide you back. Follow my voice, Judge lady. Follow the light." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Eleanor's fingers twitched. Marcus gasped. Dr. Reed's jaw dropped. "She's responding," he whispered. "Come back," Grace urged, her tone rising with conviction. "Come back because the world needs you. Come back because you still have so much dancing to do. Come back because miracles are real." Eleanor's eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted in a weak whisper. "Grace!" The monitors beeped faster. Dr. Reed leaned over her. "Judge Price, can you hear me? You're in the hospital. You had an accident." Eleanor blinked, her gaze unfocused, then locked on Grace's bright blue eyes. Tears welled in the judge's own eyes. "I heard you," she whispered. "I was lost, and you showed me the way back." Marcus dropped to his knees, covering his face with trembling hands. "She's awake," he breathed. "Thank God. She's awake." Dr. Reed hurried through a quick neurological exam. She answered his questions clearly, her mind sharp. Then Eleanor's expression shifted. I feel something," she said softly. "I feel my legs." Dr. Reed froze. "That's not possible," he said quickly. "Your spinal cord was severely damaged. You shouldn't—" But Eleanor concentrated, and her right foot shifted beneath the blanket. A collective gasp filled the room. She focused harder, and both feet moved. Dr. Reed staggered back, his face pale. "This defies all medical explanation. I don't understand." Eleanor turned her head toward Grace, tears streaming. "You did this." "You truly did," Grace shook her head, smiling. "No, Judge Lady, we did it together. You just needed someone to remind you how strong your spirit really is." The beeping of the machine seemed to soften, no longer dominating the room. Marcus rushed forward, hugging his daughter tightly. "You saved her. Grace, you saved her." But Grace only whispered, "Love saved her, Daddy. Love is stronger than fear." Later, as nurses prepared to move Eleanor to recovery, Dr. Reed stood apart, shaken. He had built a life on facts, on data, on science, yet here he was, watching the impossible unfold before his eyes. Quietly, almost to himself, he admitted, "Maybe there are things medicine cannot measure." In the waiting room, whispers spread like fire. "The judge is awake." She moved her legs. Did the child really do it? Some laughed in disbelief, some fell to their knees in prayer, and some began to believe in miracles. Back in the room, Eleanor held Grace's hand tightly. Her voice, though weak, carried a strength she had not felt in years. "Grace, you kept your promise. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope." Grace squeezed her hand. "And we still have more to do, Judge Lady. This is only the beginning." The morning light streamed through the hospital blinds, painting the room in soft gold. Judge Eleanor Price sat upright in her bed, her face no longer pale but alive with a quiet fire. She flexed her feet beneath the blanket again and again, marveling each time that they responded. 3 years of silence, broken in a single night. Marcus sat in the corner chair, exhausted but wide-eyed. As if he didn't dare blink, Grace was curled beside him, finally asleep after hours of pouring her spirit into Eleanor. Her small chest rose and fell steadily. But even in sleep, her hand clutched her father's shirt tightly. Eleanor watched them, her throat tight with emotion. For so long she had prided herself on being unmoved, unshaken, fair but unyielding. Yet here she was. Undone by the courage of a child, Dr. Reed entered, clipboard in hand, his usual confident stride slowed by disbelief. "I've repeated the test 3 times, he said quietly. "Judge Price, this isn't supposed to happen." "But it is." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Perhaps science measures bones and nerves, Jonathan, but maybe it doesn't measure hope." He looked at her with conflicted eyes, part awe, part resistance. "You're not the same patient I've known for years," he admitted. "You're more alive than I've ever seen you." That afternoon, word spread across the town like wildfire. The judge who had been bound to her wheelchair for 3 years had moved her legs. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered about trickery or exaggeration, but no one could deny what they had seen the night before. The child's hand, the twitch of toes, the undeniable spark of life. By evening, reporters camped outside the hospital, but inside, the judge's focus wasn't on the headlines. It was on the man and little girl who had changed everything. She asked Marcus to approach her bed. His eyes were heavy with shame. "Judge Price," he began. voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you, or how to apologize enough for what I did." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "You don't need to apologize to me, Marcus. You were a father trying to save his child. The law may call it theft, but the heart knows it was love." Tears filled Marcus's eyes. "But the law exists to protect," Eleanor interrupted gently. "But it also exists to serve justice. And sometimes justice is bigger than punishment." She looked at Grace, who had woken and was now standing by the window, her small figure bathed in sunlight. "Your daughter reminded me that the spirit of justice isn't in rules alone. It's in compassion, in mercy, in believing that broken things can be made whole again." 2 days later, Eleanor requested a special hearing. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Neighbors, strangers, journalists, even skeptics who wanted to see if the rumors were true. When the bailiff announced her arrival, gasps rippled through the chamber. Judge Eleanor Price entered not in her wheelchair, but on her own 2 feet, supported by a cane. She moved slowly, but each step thundered like a revelation. The gavel struck. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "before this court continues its work, I must address a matter of justice." She turned to Marcus, who sat at the defendant's table with Grace clutching his hand. "Marcus Hayes, you committed a crime. You took what did not belong to you. But the circumstances were extraordinary. You were a father standing between your child and death. And your daughter—" Eleanor's voice softened. "Your daughter reminded me that love is sometimes stronger than law." The courtroom was silent, every ear straining. "Therefore," she continued, "all charges against you are dropped. You are free. And more than that, I will personally recommend you for a position as facilities supervisor at this very hospital. The job comes with full health insurance for you and for Grace." The room erupted. Some clapped. Some wept openly. Marcus buried his face in his hands, overcome. Grace squeezed his arm. "See, Daddy? I told you love is stronger than fear." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, but when Eleanor faced them, she did not speak about herself. She spoke of Grace. "This little girl has reminded me, and should remind all of us, that healing is not only about medicine. It is about courage, about refusing to give in to despair, and about believing that even the most impossible things may one day be possible." Reporters shouted questions. Skeptics rolled their eyes. But others began to believe. That night, Marcus tucked Grace into bed in their small apartment. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. The fear of losing everything had lifted. He kissed his daughter's forehead and whispered, "You saved us, Grace. You saved me." Her eyes fluttered open. "Wise beyond her years? No, Daddy, we all saved each other. Judge Lady found her hope. You found your courage. And I just reminded you both that miracles happen when love is stronger than fear." The courthouse emptied slowly, but the story did not. Judge Eleanor Price had walked again, shaky, careful, leaning on a cane but walking, and more than that, she had set a father free. For the town, it was a spectacle. For Marcus Hall, it was salvation. For little Grace, it was only the beginning. That night, as the family returned to their small apartment, neighbors crowded the hallway, clapping, cheering, some even crying. They weren't celebrating the law being bent. They were celebrating something older, deeper. Mercy, compassion, and the proof that miracles could still visit ordinary lives. But inside the apartment, the weight of the past weeks lingered. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at his calloused hands. "How do I live up to this?" he whispered. "I was ready to let despair win. Now the whole town looks at me like I'm some chosen man." Grace climbed into his lap, resting her small head on his chest. "You don't have to be chosen, Daddy. You just have to be mine. That's enough." His throat tightened. He wrapped his arms around her and held on as if she were the only anchor in the storm. Across town, Judge Eleanor sat in her living room, cane propped against her chair. Her legs tingled with strange, tentative life. Every step she took still felt uncertain, but her spirit was awake. She replayed the scene in her mind, the child's hand, the impossible spark, the words that had undone years of bitterness. "My legs are sleeping," Grace had said. Not broken, not ruined. Sleeping. Eleanor touched the frame of an old photograph on her shelf. It showed her twirling on a dance floor in her 20s. Laughter caught mid-spin. "I thought she was gone," she whispered to herself. "Maybe she isn't." The following morning, Eleanor asked Marcus and Grace to meet her at the hospital. There, in a small administrative office, she introduced Marcus to the head of facilities. "He's the man I told you about," she said firmly. "A father who deserves a chance. Give him the job, and give this little girl the health coverage she needs." The supervisor, skeptical at first, extended his hand. "Hall, can you start Monday?" Marcus nearly broke down in tears as he shook it. "Yes, sir. Thank you." "Thank you." Grace squeezed his arm. "See, Daddy? We're going to be okay." That evening, Eleanor walked, slowly but deliberately, into a community center where families had gathered. The whispers grew into gasps. Then applause. She raised her cane and quieted the room. "3 weeks ago," she began, "I was a judge bound by law and by fear, but a child reminded me that the law without mercy is only half of justice. She showed me that when love is stronger than fear, impossible things become possible." The crowd leaned in, every word striking like a gavel. This miracle wasn't only for me. It was for all of us. For every parent who has sacrificed, for every child who has suffered, for every neighbor who has ever wondered if hope was worth holding on to. She looked down at Grace, who sat cross-legged in the front row, her green eyes shining. And it was a reminder, healing doesn't just belong to doctors or judges. Healing belongs to communities who choose to believe in one another. As people left that night, a question hung in the air. If this town could believe in miracles, could believe in love strong enough to heal bodies and change laws, what else might they believe in? What other chains could be broken, what other lives restored, if only they chose to see the impossible as possible? Marcus carried Grace home, her small arms wrapped around his neck. She whispered, half asleep, "Daddy, this is just the start." And though he didn't fully understand, he believed her. For the first time in years, he believed. The weeks that followed carried a current of change through the town. It was subtle at first, neighbors greeting each other with warmer smiles, strangers pausing to hold doors, small kindnesses multiplying like ripples on water. But soon, the change was impossible to ignore. People spoke not only of the trial or of Judge Eleanor Price's recovery, but of Grace Hall's words. "Love is stronger than fear," they repeated in churches, in classrooms, in grocery store aisles. It became less a saying and more a shared vow. At the hospital, Marcus Hall began his new job. He swept hallways, repaired elevators, changed light bulbs, tasks that once seemed small, now carried weight. Because every step he took reminded him that his daughter's medicine was secured, that her future no longer balanced on desperation. On his lunch breaks, he often visited the pediatric wing. Parents there recognized him. Some whispered about his arrest, others about his release. But when he sat beside them and said, "I know what it feels like to have nothing but hope," they listened. And when Grace visited with him, her small hand in his, they didn't see a criminal anymore. They saw a father who had chosen love over surrender. Meanwhile, Judge Eleanor adjusted to her new life. Physical therapy sessions tested her patience, but each step forward was more than progress. It was proof. She no longer stared at her wheelchair with despair. Now she saw it as a chapter, not a sentence. One morning, after completing her exercises, she asked her therapist to play a song. It was a piece of music she once danced to in her living room. Long before the accident, with shaky arms and cautious legs, she moved, halting at first, then freer. Tears filled her eyes as she realized she was not just surviving. She was dancing again. When she left the clinic that day, a small group of patients in wheelchairs applauded, and she told them, "Your bodies may feel bound, but your spirits are never broken. One day you'll find your dance again too, but miracles don't erase doubts. In coffee shops and city council meetings, skeptics raised their voices. It was coincidence, they argued. A head injury, misfired nerves. That's all? Others whispered that Eleanor had lost her judicial objectivity. One councilman demanded, "How can we trust a judge who bases rulings on a child's promise?" Eleanor heard these whispers, but instead of shrinking, she leaned into the questions. At a town forum, she stood tall, cane in hand, and declared, "I do not apologize for choosing mercy. The law is not weakened by compassion. It is completed by it. If my recovery troubles you, ask yourself this. Would you prefer a world where hope is forbidden from entering a courtroom?" The room fell silent, and slowly, applause began to rise. Back at home, Grace continued her quiet work. When a classmate cried after falling on the playground, she was the first to sit beside them. When Mrs. Mildred struggled with groceries, Grace carried a bag twice her size. She never claimed she was performing miracles. She simply shared love. And somehow, it always seemed to heal more than anyone expected. One evening, Marcus found her sketching at the table. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" he asked. "A garden," she replied, pushing the paper toward him. "See? Every flower is someone who remembered how to hope again." Marcus stared at the page. There were dozens of flowers, each one marked with a name. Neighbors, friends, even the prosecutor. "Daniel Cole. You really think they've all changed?" he asked. Grace nodded confidently. "Yes, because when people see one miracle, they start looking for others. And when they start looking, they find them. Yet under this light, shadows stirred. Not everyone welcomed the shift. Some muttered that the town was being misled by fantasy. Others, more quietly, feared what might come if such miracles began to challenge power. One evening, as Eleanor prepared case files at her desk, she received an anonymous letter. Its words were sharp, scrawled in ink that bled through the page. "Stop letting children dictate justice. Miracles don't belong in the law. If you continue, you will regret it." She set the letter down, her hands trembling, but only for a moment. Then she smiled faintly, because for the first time in 3 years, threats didn't feel heavier than hope. The town had witnessed something extraordinary, but the question now was not whether Eleanor could walk or whether Grace had a gift. The question was, what would they all do with this new faith? Would it fade into gossip and folklore, or would it ignite a movement proving that love truly could be stronger than fear? The anonymous letter was only the beginning. Within days, more arrived, slipped under Eleanor's office door, folded into her mailbox, even taped to her car. Some were crude insults, others were carefully written arguments, warning that she was eroding the very foundation of the law. One note read, "If judges believe in fairy tales, criminals will run free. Step down before you destroy everything." Eleanor read each one in silence, not with fear, but with a strange calm, because for every letter that arrived dripping with anger, 3 more came filled with gratitude. Parents wrote, thanking her for reminding them not to give up on their children. Patients wrote, saying they had chosen to fight another day because of her story. Hope was louder than hate. Yet the backlash grew louder in official places. At the county courthouse, a closed-door meeting was held. Council members debated whether Eleanor should remain on the bench. "She's compromised," one declared. "No judge should let a child's promise sway her decision." But another countered, "She ruled with compassion. Isn't justice supposed to reflect both law and humanity?" The room split down the middle. For the first time in years, the county was not arguing over politics or budgets, but over miracles. Marcus felt the ripples, too. At the hospital, whispers followed him down the hall. Some colleagues clapped his back, proud of his second chance. Others muttered that he had been freed by trickery, that he hadn't truly paid his debt. One afternoon, as he fixed a leaking pipe, a coworker sneered. "Must be nice. Having a magic kid get you off the hook." Marcus straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "She's not magic," he said evenly. "She's love, and that's harder to find than any miracle." The co-worker scoffed, but said nothing more. Grace, unaware of the politics, continued to live simply. She still helped neighbors with groceries, still comforted classmates, still filled her sketchbook with flowers named after people she believed had learned hope. But she sensed the tension. One evening, she asked her father, "Why do some people get mad when others are happy?" Marcus sighed, pulling her into his lap. "Because, sweetheart, hope scares people who've forgotten how to believe. It reminds them of what they lost." Grace tilted her head, thoughtful. "Then we'll just have to remind them again and again, until they remember." Meanwhile, Eleanor prepared for her first major case since her recovery, a dispute involving a large corporation accused of exploiting workers. She knew every decision would be scrutinized, every word dissected. Some wanted her to fail. Some wanted her to prove miracles made better judges. All wanted to see if her ruling would be different now. The night before court, she sat at her desk, Kane by her side. She whispered aloud, as if to the empty room, "I will not choose between law and mercy. I will choose both. And if that is heresy, then let it be a holy one." When the hearing began, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Council members watched from the gallery, and in the very front, Grace sat swinging her legs, her green eyes steady as ever. The corporation's lawyers argued with icy precision. The workers testified with trembling voices. Eleanor listened, weighing not only evidence but the silent weight of human suffering that clung to every word. At recess, whispers filled the halls. Would she side with the powerful to prove she was objective, or with the weak to prove she was merciful? Grace tugged Eleanor's sleeve as she left the bench. "Judge lady," she whispered, "just remember what you taught me. Justice is strongest when it stands with love." Eleanor smiled faintly. This child, she thought, is not bending the law. She is reminding me what the law was meant for in the first place. That evening, as the town waited for the verdict, another storm brewed online. Social media lit up with hashtags, some praising Eleanor as a hero, others mocking her as the miracle judge. Comment threads turned vicious, threats mixed with prayers. Supporters clashed with cynics, each post fueling the fire. Eleanor scrolled through them only briefly before shutting her phone. She refused to let noise drown out truth. The stage was set. Her ruling, due the next morning, would not only determine the fate of exploited workers, it would determine whether miracles had a place in the cold chambers of the law. And as she closed her eyes that night, one thought carried her into sleep. Hope may frighten the fearful, but fear will never rule me again. The courthouse was fuller than it had ever been. Reporters set up cameras outside, capturing every angle. Inside, workers sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces etched with exhaustion and quiet hope. Across the aisle, executives in sharp suits whispered to one another, confident their wealth would shield them. Judge Eleanor Price entered slowly, cane in hand, head held high. The gallery rose to its feet, not in obedience alone, but in awe. For weeks, the world had debated whether her recovery disqualified her or made her something greater. Now she would answer not with speeches, but with judgment. The case was clear in its complexity. Workers testified about 12-hour shifts without pay for overtime, about unsafe conditions, ignored injuries, families going hungry while profits soared, each story cut like a blade through the room. The corporation's lawyers countered with spreadsheets and legal jargon. They painted the workers as exaggerating, the injuries as accidents, the missing wages as misunderstandings. Every time they spoke, their words dripped with a calm arrogance that made the workers shrink further in their seats. Eleanor listened without interruption. She knew both sides must be heard, but in her chest, she felt the weight of Grace's reminder, justice is strongest when it stands with love. During a recess, whispers filled the courthouse corridors. Some worried Eleanor would bend to public opinion. Choosing mercy over law, others feared she would bend to power, proving her skeptics right. In the quiet judge's chamber, Grace slipped in, holding a folded piece of paper. "I drew you something," she said softly. Eleanor opened it. A flower, bright yellow, bloomed across the page. At its roots were words written in a child's careful hand. Truth, courage, love. "It's for you," Grace whispered, "so you don't forget what really matters." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. This was no legal brief, no precedent, but it was truer than any argument she had heard. When the final day of testimony arrived, the courtroom was hushed. Eleanor adjusted her glasses and began. "In this court," she said firmly, "the law is our guide. But law is not blind to humanity. It is built to serve it." She recounted the evidence piece by piece, dismantling the corporation's defense with precision. She quoted labor statutes, referenced past cases, and cut through the smoke screens of jargon. Then she paused. The room leaned in. "Justice is not served by ignoring suffering," she continued, voice rising. "When a worker cannot feed his child while an executive dines on silver plates, the law must not hide behind numbers. It must protect the dignity of every person." The executives shifted uncomfortably. The workers held their breath. Her gavel struck. "This court finds the corporation guilty of wage theft, unsafe practices, and systemic exploitation. Restitution will be paid in full. Penalties will be imposed, and this court orders independent oversight to ensure no worker is ever silenced again." Gasps erupted. Workers wept openly. Executives muttered in outrage. But Eleanor was not finished. She looked directly at the gallery. "I render this judgment not only as a matter of law, but as a matter of truth. We cannot build a society where fear rules and love is dismissed as weakness. Because when we do, we strip away the humanity the law was created to defend." The courtroom broke into applause. Reporters scrambled to capture her every word. Outside, headlines exploded. "Miracle Judge rules for workers. Compassion and law collide in landmark case." Eleanor emerged from the courthouse steps into a sea of microphones. She raised a hand, and silence fell. "My recovery is not the miracle," she said clearly. "The miracle is that people still believe in justice, that we are willing to fight for each other when fear tells us not to. Today we chose love over fear, and tomorrow we must choose it again." The crowd erupted once more. Grace stood beside her, clutching the flower drawing. Marcus placed his arm around his daughter, pride shining through tired eyes. That night, the three of them sat together in the small apartment. The air was quiet, peaceful. Marcus looked at Eleanor and said, "You didn't just save those workers today. You proved that mercy and justice don't have to be enemies." Eleanor shook her head gently. "No, Grace proved that. I only remembered what she already knew." Grace giggled, her eyes shining. "Daddy, Judge Lady, don't you see? This is what Mommy always said. Miracles happen when love is stronger than fear." And for the first time, all three of them laughed together, the sound filling the room like music, proof that hope was not fragile, but unbreakable. The judgment echoed far beyond the courthouse walls. Within hours, news stations carried the story across the nation. Social feeds overflowed with clips of Judge Eleanor Price declaring, "Love is stronger than fear." For many, it was the first time they had heard a judge speak not only in statutes, but in the language of humanity. In coffee shops and union halls, people replayed her words. Workers who had given up hope began to wonder if their own voices might matter again. Communities long ignored felt a spark of recognition. And yet, in corporate boardrooms, panic set in. The morning after the verdict, Marcus scrolled through headlines on his cracked phone. Executives decry dangerous precedent. Wall Street reacts to compassionate judgment. Behind the spin was a clear message. The powerful were afraid. He looked up from the screen at Grace, who was coloring quietly. "Baby girl," he whispered. "You don't even know what you started." Grace tilted her head. Yes, I do. We reminded people that love still works, Marcus smiled, shaken by how simple she made it sound. Eleanor, meanwhile, returned to her chambers to find a mountain of letters waiting. Some handwritten, some printed, some emailed and printed again. Workers thanking her for courage. Single parents telling her they now believed the law might protect them. Too. But nestled among the gratitude were threats. "You've overstepped," one anonymous note read. "You've turned the courtroom into a pulpit. If you don't step down, you'll regret it." Eleanor folded the paper slowly. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let fear creep back in. Grace's flower drawing still sat on her desk, roots of truth. "Courage, love," she whispered to herself. "Fear is loud, but love is stronger." That evening, a town hall meeting was held in a community center. Workers, neighbors, activists, even skeptical business owners packed the room. Everyone wanted to hear from the judge who had dared to change the script. When Eleanor stepped onto the small stage, leaning on her cane, the room fell silent. Not because of her title, but because of her presence. "I am not here tonight as your judge," she began softly. "I am here as a woman who once forgot how to hope, and I want you to know you gave me that hope back." The room stirred, murmurs of recognition rippling like waves. "But understand this," she continued. "A verdict is not the end. It is only a beginning. Justice is not a speech or a gavel strike. Justice is what we do, together, every single day." A young worker raised his hand. "Judge Price, what if other courts don't follow your example? What if they still ignore us?" Eleanor nodded. "Then we hold them accountable. Not by shouting alone, but by organizing, by voting, by refusing to be silent. The law bends slowly, but it bends when enough hands press on it." An older woman stood. "My husband died in a factory accident. They said it was his fault. No one ever listened. Until now, I thought no one ever would." Her voice cracked, and the room leaned toward her in compassion. Eleanor stepped down from the stage, walked directly to her, and took her hand. "I cannot erase that pain," she said softly. "But I promise you this, your story matters." And when stories matter, change begins. Tears streamed across the woman's cheeks as the room erupted in applause. Meanwhile, in a downtown skyscraper, executives gathered behind closed doors. They plotted appeals, political pressure, media campaigns to discredit Eleanor. "She's a danger," one growled. "If other judges start thinking they can mix love with law, our entire system of control collapses." But even they knew. The tide was shifting. What had begun as one father's desperate act was now a movement. Back at the hall apartment, Marcus tucked Grace into bed. "Daddy," she asked, eyes heavy with sleep. "Yes, baby girl? Did we really change things?" Marcus hesitated. The world outside was still ruthless. Corporations still wielded power. Fear still whispered in dark corners. But then he remembered the courtroom cheers, the town hall, the trembling workers who now stood taller. "Yes," he said firmly, "we did. And tomorrow we'll keep changing more." Grace smiled faintly, drifting into dreams, her hand clutching the paper flower Eleanor had returned to her. Late that night, Eleanor sat by her window, city lights glittering below, the threats, the pressure, the weight of her new role pressed heavily on her chest. But then she thought of Grace's words. "We reminded people that love still works." For the first time in years, she whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for a world finally daring to believe. And somewhere in the quiet city, others whispered too, workers planning to unionize, parents planning to speak up, communities planning to rise, because once a miracle is seen, it cannot be unseen, and once people taste justice, they cannot go back to hunger. The pushback arrived faster than anyone expected. Within a week of the ruling, headlines shifted. What began as praise for Eleanor Price's courage twisted into questions. Was she impartial? Was she swayed by sympathy? The same outlets that celebrated her words now dissected them with suspicion. On primetime shows, Polished commentators debated. Judges must interpret the law, not emotions, one declared. Another countered. But isn't justice about human beings, not just contracts? The arguments raged, each side louder than the last, and in the middle of it all sat Eleanor, watching her name tossed around like a football. At home, Marcus saw the change too. His co-workers whispered about company memos warning against new legal risks. Supervisors hinted that anyone speaking out might lose hours, or worse, their jobs. They're scared, Marcus told Eleanor one evening. They're lashing out because you proved the law can actually work for us. Eleanor nodded, but her eyes were weary. Fear doesn't just lash out, she said quietly. Fear organizes. She was right. Within days, a formal ethics complaint was filed against her. The accusation, she had let personal bias influence her ruling. That she had blurred the sacred line between law and sentiment. It was the very thing her opponents needed to try to strip her of the bench. Grace overheard whispers of the complaint. At breakfast, she asked innocently, "Judge lady, are they taking your chair away?" Eleanor froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Marcus quickly jumped in. "They're trying, baby." "But that doesn't mean they'll win." Grace frowned. "But why?" "You told the truth. Isn't that what judges are supposed to do?" Silence hung heavy. Eleanor finally reached across the table, squeezing Grace's hand. "Yes, sweetheart." And sometimes telling the truth makes powerful people angry. In the city's power corridors, the strategy was clear. If they couldn't overturn her ruling, they would smear her reputation. Op-eds appeared calling her the miracle judge, dripping with sarcasm. Cartoons mocked her recovery, suggesting it clouded her judgment. But while some laughed, others rallied. Union leaders organized marches. Faith communities lit candles in her honor. A slogan began to appear on posters and street walls. Love stronger than fear. What had begun as a judgment was becoming a movement, and movements. Eleanor knew, always faced backlash. At a late-night meeting in the hall apartment, activists crowded into the small living room. Some sat on the floor. Others stood pressed against the walls. Eleanor listened as voices rose one after another. They want to silence you. They want to scare us back into the shadows. This is bigger than just one case. Marcus looked around the room, realizing most of the people here had never met Eleanor before the trial, and yet they trusted her as if she had always been theirs. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I am not a savior," she said firmly. "I am just one woman who remembered what a little girl taught me. If they take my robe, I'll still fight. If they silence my gavel, I'll still speak. But you," she gestured around the room, "you must carry this further than I ever could." The room erupted in applause. Not polite, but thunderous, raw, desperate. For many, it was the first time someone in power had told them they were the real power. But danger lurked outside those walls. That same week, Eleanor's car was vandalized, tires slashed, windows shattered. A note left on the dashboard read, "Step down before it's too late." Marcus wanted to call the police. Eleanor shook her head. "They'll file a report and forget it." "This isn't about a car. It's about fear trying to creep back in." Grace, standing in the doorway, whispered, "Don't let them scare you. Remember my flower." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Yes, Grace. The roots are truth, courage, love, and roots grow deeper when storms come." At the next town rally, Eleanor stood before hundreds under a gray, threatening sky. The air smelled of rain, the crowd buzzing with nervous anticipation. She raised her cane high, her voice carrying across the plaza. "They think breaking windows will break our spirit. They think filing papers will erase our voices. But let me tell you something. Fear is temporary. Love is permanent." Thunder rumbled overhead, punctuating her words. The crowd roared. Umbrellas raised, fists clenched, and yet, as she looked across the sea of faces, Eleanor felt the weight of what lay ahead. The ethics trial was coming, her future on the bench, and perhaps the survival of their fragile movement would soon hang in the balance. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the city lights flickering. her mind restless. What if they stripped her title? What if fear won? She thought of Grace's flower again, roots deep, petals bright, fragile yet unbreakable, and she whispered into the silence, "Even if they take everything, I will not let them take hope." The ethics tribunal convened inside a stark government building, far removed from the grandeur of the main courthouse. There were no camera crews allowed inside, only a handful of reporters scribbling notes. The atmosphere was clinical, almost sterile, as if designed to strip away emotion. Eleanor Price sat at the long table, her cane resting against the chair, her face calm but pale. Across from her, a panel of 5 senior judges presided, robes heavy with tradition. Their task was not to decide guilt or innocence of a crime, but whether Eleanor herself was fit to remain on the bench. The stakes were enormous. For Eleanor, it was her career. For the workers, it was their victory. For the community, it was their hope. The lead prosecutor, a polished attorney named Gerald Ross, opened the hearing with a measured tone. "Colleagues, we are here to determine whether Judge Price violated the sacred neutrality of the bench. Her ruling, while emotionally compelling, appears to have been driven not by law but by sympathy." He gestured to a thick binder of transcripts. She spoke of love, of fear, of miracles. But where in our statutes do such words belong? If we allow this precedent, we replace law with sentiment. And that is chaos. The room was silent, the words hanging heavy. Eleanor's defense was led by a young attorney named Layla Chen, who had volunteered pro bono. Layla rose, her voice steady but passionate. "Your Honors, the question is not whether Judge Price felt compassion. The question is whether her ruling was grounded in law. And it was. The statutes on wage theft are clear. The penalties for unsafe practices are established. Judge Price applied the law exactly as written, but she also did something more. She spoke truthfully about why the law exists. The law is not abstract. It is a shield for the vulnerable. It was created so that people, not just corporations, might live with dignity. That is not bias. It is the essence of justice." She closed the binder with a soft thud. "Do not punish a judge for remembering that the law serves humans, not numbers." During a recess, Marcus paced the hallway nervously. "Why does it feel like the whole world is against her?" he muttered. Grace tugged at his sleeve. "They're not, Daddy. Look." She pointed to the crowd gathered outside the tribunal building. Through the glass doors, chants drifted in. "Love stronger than fear. Love stronger than fear." Hundreds had shown up, workers, parents, elders, faces pressed against barricades, holding flowers and signs. Marcus exhaled slowly. "They're here for her." Grace nodded firmly. "No, they're here for all of us." Back inside, the panel of judges questioned Eleanor directly. "Judge Price," one asked, "do you admit to using language in your ruling that went beyond the narrow text of the law?" "Yes," Eleanor replied clearly. "I admit it. I spoke not only in statutes but in spirit, because the law without spirit is an empty cage." Another judge leaned forward. "Do you understand how dangerous it is for personal belief to influence rulings?" Eleanor met his gaze. "What is more dangerous?" she asked softly. "A judge who remembers humanity, or one who forgets it?" The panel shifted uneasily. The prosecutor pounced. "See? She cannot separate her heart from her duty. That is precisely why she must be removed." Layla rose again. "No, that is why she must remain. Because the heartless application of law is not justice. It is cruelty disguised as order." Her words rang out, sharp and unshakable. As the tribunal drew toward closing arguments, tension reached its peak. The panel's decision could end Eleanor's career and unravel the fragile hope she had reignited. Even the air seemed heavy, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Outside, the chants grew louder, joined by church choirs, labor songs, even children's voices. The street pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing into the sterile hearing room. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, hearing Grace's voice in her memory. "Remember my flower. Truth, courage, love." When she opened them, her voice was steady. I will not apologize for remembering why the law exists. If that costs me this robe, so be it. But know this, stripping me of title cannot strip people of their courage. Love is stronger than fear, and that truth will outlast this room, this panel, even me. The gallery erupted in gasps, some with admiration, some with outrage. The panel of judges withdrew to deliberate, leaving the chamber buzzing with uncertainty. Marcus held Grace tightly, his heart pounding. Grace whispered, "Daddy, do you think they'll take her away?" Marcus kissed her hair, unable to answer, because in that moment, no one knew. The tribunal chamber was hushed when the 5 judges returned. Every footstep echoed against the marble floor. Each second stretched thin with dread. Eleanor Price sat straight-backed, her cane resting against the table. Marcus clutched Grace's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The presiding judge, a gray-haired man with a voice like gravel, cleared his throat. After careful deliberation, "This panel has reached a decision," he paused, letting silence build like a storm. "By a vote of 3-2, we rule, Judge Eleanor Price will retain her position on the bench." The chamber exploded. Gasps, shouts, cheers from workers, fists raised high. Reporters scrambled to file breaking alerts. Eleanor closed her eyes, relief washing over her like rain on parched earth. But the judge wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "let this serve as a warning. Judges must exercise restraint. The line between law and sentiment must remain clear. Judge Price, you walk that line dangerously." The words stung, but they could not erase the victory. Eleanor nodded solemnly. "I accept your caution, but I will never apologize for remembering why law exists." Outside, the chants grew deafening. "Love stronger than fear! Love stronger than fear!" Through the tall windows, the sound seeped into the chamber, uncontainable. When Eleanor emerged onto the courthouse steps, the crowd surged forward, flowers were thrust into her hands, children sat on parents' shoulders, waving signs. One banner stretched across the plaza. "Justice with a heart." She raised her cane above her head. The crowd roared, and in that roar was not just celebration, it was defiance. Fear had tried to silence them. Instead, love had multiplied. Marcus lifted Grace onto his shoulder so she could see. "Daddy," she whispered, "I told you they couldn't take her chair away." Tears filled his eyes. "You were right, baby girl. You were right all along." The victory was fragile, and everyone knew it. Opponents were already planning appeals, lobbying legislators, tightening their grip. But for one electric moment, hope was undeniable. That evening, Eleanor, Marcus, and Grace sat in the small apartment. The flower drawing hung proudly on the wall above the table. Marcus poured tea into mismatched mugs. "To survival," he toasted. Eleanor raised her cup. "To courage." Grace lifted her juice box with a grin. "To love." They clinked gently, the sound tiny yet thunderous. Later that night, Eleanor received a call. It was from a union leader in another state. "Judge Price," the woman said, her voice brimming with emotion, "your ruling gave us the courage to file our own case. For the first time, workers believe we might actually win." Eleanor listened, heart swelling. The movement was spreading beyond city limits. Her words, once ridiculed as sentimental, were igniting action across the country. But with the hope came new fear. More powerful enemies would rise, and Eleanor knew this tribunal was only the beginning. Meanwhile, in the boardrooms of towering skyscrapers, executives seethed. "She survived the ethics trial," one snarled. "Then we escalate," another replied coldly. "If we can't take her robe, we'll take her allies. We'll make the cost of standing with her unbearable." Plans were drawn, money flowed into dark channels. The battle was far from over. Back in the apartment, Grace curled up beside Eleanor on the couch. "Judge lady," she asked softly, "were you scared they would say no?" Eleanor smoothed Grace's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Terrified." "Then why didn't you stop?" Eleanor smiled gently. "Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love even when fear screams the loudest. Grace's eyelids drooped as she whispered, "Then we'll keep choosing love." And Eleanor knew, no matter what storms came next, that small, unshakable truth would carry them through. The next morning, the headlines were clear. Price survives tribunal, movement grows. Love versus fear, landmark ethics decision splits legal world. The nation was watching, waiting to see what came next. Would fear regroup stronger, or would love continue to ripple outward? One thing was certain. The story was no longer Eleanor's alone. It belonged to everyone who dared to believe. The celebration faded quickly. Within a week of the tribunal's decision, retaliation began in subtle but sharp ways. Union leaders who had rallied outside the courthouse found their offices raided by safety inspectors, workers, who had testified in Eleanor. Price's courtroom received sudden layoffs. Their names quietly blacklisted across industries. Marcus Hall felt it firsthand. One morning, he showed up at the factory only to be told his services were no longer required. No explanation, no severance, just a cold escort to the door. He walked home, fists clenched, fury and fear battling in his chest. Grace ran to him, hugging his legs. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Marcus forced a smile, hiding his anger. "Nothing we can't handle, baby girl. Nothing we can't handle." But deep down, he knew the price of standing with Eleanor was now being extracted. Eleanor watched the backlash unfold like dominoes tipping over. Phone calls flooded her chambers from families terrified of losing everything. She wanted to intervene, but her judicial hands were tied. If she pushed too hard, they'd accuse her of activism. If she stayed silent, people would suffer alone. That night, she sat at the apartment table with Marcus and Grace, the flower drawing watching over them like a silent witness. "They're not just punishing me," Eleanor said, voice heavy. "They're punishing anyone who dares to hope." Marcus slammed his fist lightly against the wood. "Then we can't let them break us. They fire me? Fine, I'll find another way." "But we don't back down." Grace looked between them, her eyes wide and steady. "Remember," she whispered, "roots grow deeper in storms." Eleanor reached out and took her hand. "Yes, Grace, but roots alone aren't enough. We need branches. We need others to stand with us, even when it costs them." Word spread quickly about the reprisals. At first, fear tightened its grip. People lowered their heads, avoided meetings, stopped chanting in the streets. The movement seemed to be unraveling, but then, a spark. A group of teachers announced a solidarity strike, citing Eleanor's words about dignity. Healthcare workers followed, walking out in protest of unsafe conditions. Each action was small on its own. Together, they formed a chorus. New slogans appeared. "We are the roots. Fear can't starve us all." What the powerful intended as intimidation was becoming tinder for a larger fire. Still, danger grew. Late one evening, Marcus was followed by two men in dark coats. He ducked into an alley, heart pounding until they disappeared. The next morning, a brick shattered the apartment window, landing on the floor with a note tied around it. "Stop, or she falls." Eleanor picked up the note, her hand shaking. The threat was no longer abstract. It was personal, sharp and near. Grace touched her arm. "Judge Lady, don't let them make you afraid." Eleanor crouched down, looking her in the eyes. "Grace, I am afraid. But fear doesn't get the final word." Marcus put an arm around both of them. "Then we fight smarter, together." Days later, a massive rally was organized downtown. Workers, teachers, nurses, and families flooded the streets, tens of thousands strong. Eleanor hesitated before stepping onto the stage, flanked by Marcus and Grace. The crowd quieted as she gripped the microphone. They think by firing workers, by breaking windows, by whispering threats in the dark, they can silence us. But what they don't understand is that fear shrinks when we stand together. She lifted Grace's flower drawing high above her head. "This was given to me by a child who refuses to believe love is weak." Look around you. This is what love looks like when it grows. This is what fear can never erase. The plaza erupted. Chants shook the glass windows of skyscrapers, echoing up to boardrooms where executives watched nervously. That night, news broadcasts carried images of the rally nationwide. For the first time, commentators admitted the movement was no longer just local, it was spreading like wildfire. But in the same broadcasts, warnings appeared. Anonymous sources spoke of unrest, of radicalization. Whispers of government intervention began to rise. Eleanor turned off the television, her face grave. "They're preparing to label us dangerous," she said softly. Marcus clenched his jaw. "They're scared because they see they're losing." Grace, curled up on the couch, whispered drowsily, "Miracles don't stop when they scare people. That's when they start working harder." Eleanor kissed her forehead. "Yes, Grace, but miracles also need protection. And tomorrow, we'll have to decide how far we're willing to go." Outside, the city lights glowed like a battlefield waiting for dawn. The backlash had begun, and no one knew how much it would cost. But one truth was clear. Love had become dangerous, and that was precisely why it was powerful. The crackdown arrived at dawn. Sirens split the quiet streets. Flashing lights bouncing off brick walls and shuttered windows. Police in riot gear poured into neighborhoods where workers lived, their shields and batons gleaming under street lamps. By sunrise, dozens of activists had been arrested, union halls were padlocked. Community centers raided. The message was unmistakable. Hope had crossed a line. Marcus Hall watched from his window as officers dragged away his neighbor, a soft-spoken man who had handed out food at rallies. Grace clutched his arm, whispering, "Daddy, why are they taking him?" "He didn't do anything wrong." Marcus swallowed hard, rage and helplessness boiling together. "They're trying to scare us, baby." That's all fear knows how to do. Across town, Eleanor Price sat in chambers stripped bare. Boxes of files were stacked against the wall. Phone lines cut off. Her staff told not to report to work. She hadn't been removed officially, but the machinery of power was grinding her into isolation. A government official visited that morning, a neatly dressed man with a practiced smile. "Judge Price, consider this friendly advice," he said smoothly. "Step down quietly. Retire with dignity. If you stay, you'll bring ruin to yourself and anyone tied to you." Eleanor stared at him, her cane resting firmly against the floor. "I've already faced ruin," she replied, "and I survived. Do you really think silence frightens me more than injustice?" The official's smile faded. "Then you've chosen the hard road." When he left, Eleanor whispered to herself, "So be it." That evening, a hastily organized meeting took place in Marcus's apartment. The small living room was packed again. Teachers, workers, nurses, faith leaders, even young students still in their uniforms. Eleanor spoke quietly, her voice carrying weight even in exhaustion. "They've escalated. The arrests are only the beginning. They'll try to paint us as criminals, radicals, even traitors." A teacher raised her hand. "Then how do we fight back without giving them the excuse they want?" Eleanor looked around the room, at faces worn but unbroken. "We fight by standing together. We fight with truth. And we fight with love, because that is the one weapon they cannot control." Marcus slammed his fist into his palm. "Then let's show them we're not afraid. Let's take this movement beyond our city. If they want to silence us here, we'll speak louder everywhere else." The room erupted in agreement. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, a different kind of meeting unfolded. Executives, lobbyists, and government officials gathered in a skyscraper boardroom. A digital map glowed on the wall, dotted with cities where solidarity rallies had spread. "This has grown beyond containment," one official muttered. "If we don't crush it now, it will destabilize everything." A CEO leaned forward. "Then crush it. Use the media. Use the courts. Use the police. Whatever it takes. If one judge and a handful of workers can rattle us this badly, imagine what happens if the whole country believes them." The room agreed. The order was clear: escalate. The next morning, national headlines shifted. Worker movement tied to extremism. Judge Price linked to disorder. Photographs of peaceful rallies were cropped to show only scuffles, edited to look like chaos. Eleanor read the papers with a sinking heart. "They're rewriting the story," she whispered. Marcus slammed the paper down. "Then we tell our story louder. They can twist images, but they can't erase the truth from people's mouths." Grace looked up from coloring at the table. "They can't erase flowers either," she said softly. Both adults stared at her, confused. Grace held up her drawing. "Flowers grow back even if you step on them. That's what we are." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Out of the mouths of children comes the deepest wisdom." That night the movement answered back. Thousands gathered in the heart of the city, holding candles that glowed like stars against the darkness. Eleanor stepped onto the stage, Marcus and Grace at her side. "They call us extremists," she said, her voice ringing clear. "But what is extreme about wanting safety at work? What is extreme about demanding fair wages? What is extreme about believing love is stronger than fear?" The crowd erupted, chants rising like thunder. The plaza shook with the sound of defiance. "They can raid our homes. They can twist our words. They can even try to take my robe. But they cannot take our courage. They cannot take our love. And they cannot take our future unless we hand it to them." The candles swayed in unison. A sea of light in the darkness. From the rooftops, cameras captured the scene, tens of thousands standing shoulder to shoulder, voices woven together in a single declaration, love stronger than fear. And in that moment, under the threat of power and the shadow of repression, a new truth emerged. This was no longer about one judge. It was about everyone who refused to bow to fear. The battle had escalated, but so had the courage. The spark became a fire. Within weeks, candlelight vigils turned into marches that spread far beyond the city. In Chicago, sanitation workers carried signs that read, "Love stronger than fear." In Atlanta, teachers walked out of classrooms to demand dignity. In Los Angeles, nurses stood arm in arm outside hospitals, chanting Eleanor Price's words. What began in one courtroom now coursed through the nation's veins. The movement was no longer about a single ruling. It was about reclaiming the promise of justice itself. But with growth came danger. Federal officials branded the protests destabilizing. Some governors ordered curfews, claiming public safety. Media pundits sneered, calling it sentimental populism. Eleanor watched the coverage late at night, the glow of the television painting her face in shadow. She turned to Marcus. "They're preparing to criminalize love." Marcus leaned forward, jaw set. "Then we remind them love built this country long before fear ever policed it." Grace, curled on the couch, whispered sleepily, "Flowers don't care what names you call them. They still grow." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Yes, Grace. And so will we." Soon invitations poured in. Universities asked Eleanor to speak. Faith leaders wanted her at pulpits. Workers in other cities begged her to march beside them. She felt torn. To step beyond her bench risked feeding the accusations of bias, but to remain silent felt like betrayal. At a gathering in the apartment, she voiced her turmoil. "I swore an oath to uphold the law, but the law has become a tool for fear. Do I protect the robe, or do I protect the people?" The room was silent, heavy with the weight of her words. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You don't have to choose, Eleanor. The robe doesn't give you power. The people do. The robe just shows them where you stand." Grace tugged her sleeve. "Judge lady, maybe your robe is like a flower pot. It helps for a while. But the flower has to grow bigger than the pot." Eleanor stared at her, stunned by the child's clarity. Perhaps it wasn't about abandoning her role, but transcending it. The next week, she traveled to Washington, D.C. Tens of thousands flooded the National Mall, a sea of candles stretching to the horizon. Workers from every state stood shoulder to shoulder. It was one of the largest demonstrations in decades. Eleanor stepped onto the stage, the Capitol dome glowing behind her. Her cane tapped softly against the platform. The crowd fell silent, waiting. "When I sat in that courtroom months ago," she began, I thought justice meant applying the law as written. But a little girl taught me that justice is more than ink on paper. It is love written into action. It is courage, spoken into truth. And it is dignity made visible. When people stand together, the crowd erupted. The chant rising, "Love stronger than fear." Yet even as cheers filled the mall, shadows gathered. Helicopters circled overhead. Lines of armored vehicles rumbled in nearby streets. Officials whispered of declaring the demonstrations unlawful. Eleanor raised her voice above the roar. They want you to believe you are small. They want you to believe fear is inevitable. But look around. Does this look small to you? The chant surged louder, echoing across monuments built to honor freedom. Marcus, standing with Grace at the edge of the stage, felt chills run down his spine. They were no longer witnesses. They were part of history. That night, back at the hotel, Eleanor sat by the window overlooking the mall, now quiet and dark. Marcus joined her, exhaustion etched into his face. "You know they won't stop," he said. "They'll push harder. They'll try to break you. Maybe even us." Eleanor nodded. "I know. But every time they push, they prove our point. Fear only knows how to control. We've shown that love knows how to create." Grace stirred in her sleep, clutching the flower drawing she carried everywhere. Eleanor whispered into the stillness. "If they strip me of my robe tomorrow, I'll march without it. If they lock me away, I'll speak through those who remain. Because this isn't about me anymore. It never was. It's about the promise that justice can live again, if we dare to believe." Outside, the first rays of dawn began to creep across the horizon. The nation stood at a crossroads. Would fear strike harder, or would love keep growing beyond every boundary? One thing was certain. The flower had already outgrown its pot. The morning after the rally in Washington, the crackdown began. Armored vehicles rolled into city streets before dawn, their engines growling like predators. Protest camps were dismantled. Tents slashed, candles trampled into the pavement. Helicopters hovered overhead, their spotlights piercing the night as if to erase every shadow of hope. Eleanor Price watched from her hotel window as police dragged demonstrators into vans. She gripped her cane tightly, her knuckles white. Marcus paced behind her, fury radiating from every step. "They're treating us like criminals, like we're at war with our own country." Eleanor turned to him, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. "They are afraid, Marcus. And fear dressed in power always looks like this. By midday, news channels broadcast the arrests with grim commentary. Unlawful assemblies, one anchor repeated, the phrase like a drumbeat. Clips showed protesters shouting, edited to look like chaos, while the candles and songs were left unseen. In the chaos, Grace sat silently on the bed, clutching her drawing. Her small voice broke the heavy silence. "Judge lady, are they going to take you too?" Eleanor knelt beside her, placing both hands on the child's shoulders. "They may try, sweetheart, but listen to me. No matter what happens, love does not live in buildings or robes. It lives here." She pressed a hand to Grace's chest. "As long as you carry it, no one can take it away." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes wet but fierce. That evening, federal agents knocked on the hotel door. Eleanor opened it calmly. Cane in hand, the lead agent, expression flat, held out a document. "Judge Price, you are ordered to appear for questioning tomorrow. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention." Marcus stepped forward angrily. "You can't just—" Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. "It's all right. We knew this moment would come." The agent's eyes flickered, perhaps expecting fear, but Eleanor only nodded. "I will appear, and I will speak the truth." That night, the three of them gathered close, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily. Marcus muttered, "If you go, they'll try to break you. If you refuse, they'll call you a fugitive." Eleanor's gaze was firm. "I cannot hide. If I do, everything we've built collapses. The people need to see that love does not cower when fear knocks." Grace whispered, "Then we'll go with you." Eleanor shook her head gently. "No, Grace. You and your father must stay safe. If they silence me, it will be your voices that carry the truth." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes, but he said nothing. Before dawn, Eleanor wrote a short letter and slid it under Marcus's door. It read, "If they strip me of freedom, remember this, justice is not mine alone. It is yours and hers, and everyone's who dares to believe. Do not let my silence be the end. Let it be the beginning." As the sun rose, she dressed simply, robe left behind. Her cane tapped against the floor with every step, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, black SUVs waited. Eleanor walked toward them unflinching, the words echoing in her mind. Love stronger than fear. The hearing room was designed for intimidation. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the long table. Behind it sat officials in dark suits, faces unreadable, eyes sharp as blades. At the center, Eleanor Price was seated, her cane resting beside her chair like a quiet witness. "Judge Price," the lead interrogator began, voice clipped and cold, "you are accused of undermining judicial neutrality, inciting unlawful assemblies, and using your position to promote disorder. How do you plead?" Eleanor met his gaze, her tone calm but unyielding. "I plead guilty to speaking the truth. When silence was demanded, I plead guilty to choosing love over fear, and I plead guilty to believing justice should heal rather than wound." A murmur swept through the room. Some officials frowned. Others exchanged wary glances. Outside the building, hundreds gathered behind barricades. Workers carried signs painted hastily the night before. "Justice with love." "We are all Eleanor." Despite the threat of arrest, they sang softly, their voices weaving together like threads of hope. Marcus stood at the front, Grace perched on his shoulders, her flower drawing taped to a cardboard sign. Each chant felt like a shield around Eleanor, though she could not hear it from inside. Back in the hearing, the questions turned sharper. "Do you deny encouraging demonstrations that disrupted public order?" Eleanor leaned forward, her voice steady. "I encourage dignity. If the public chose to stand together peacefully, it is because dignity has been denied too long. Disorder is not born from love, it is born from oppression." The interrogator's jaw tightened. "And do you admit you placed personal feelings above the law?" At this, Eleanor's eyes glistened, but her voice did not falter. "No, I placed humanity within the law. Without humanity, the law is just a weapon for the powerful." A silence followed, heavy and charged. Suddenly, the doors at the back creaked open. A young aide whispered to one of the officials, who paled as he read a slip of paper. Across town, footage was going viral. Live streams of workers marching, clergy praying in the streets, students walking out of classrooms. The movement had ignited again, stronger than before. The interrogator tried to press on. "Judge Price, are you prepared to face removal from office, imprisonment, perhaps worse?" Eleanor sat taller, hands folded before her. "Yes, because fear has already imprisoned this nation long enough. If my body must be confined to free others from fear, then so be it." The words cut through the chamber like a bell. For a moment, even her accusers seemed shaken. Outside, the chant swelled louder, echoing against stone walls, "Love stronger than fear." The phrase thundered until windows rattled. Grace's small voice joined in, carrying higher than the crowd, innocent yet fierce. Inside, Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, as though she could feel the vibrations of that chant through the floor. It gave her strength. When she opened them again, she delivered her final statement. "You can strip me of titles, robes, even freedom, but you cannot strip away what has already been planted. The flower has grown too deep into the soil of this nation, and no decree, no prison, no fear will dig it out." The officials whispered urgently among themselves, uncertainty breaking their practiced calm. The lead interrogator banged his gavel for silence. "This session will recess. Judge Price, you are to remain in custody until further notice." Two guards moved toward Eleanor. She rose slowly with her cane, her posture unbroken. As they led her away, she whispered almost to herself, "Let them see, let them hear. The seed is already blooming. The news spread like wildfire. By dawn, radios buzzed, phones lit up, and whispers moved through crowded buses. They've taken her. Judge Eleanor Price was in custody. For some, it felt like confirmation of their worst fears. For others, it was a spark too powerful to smother. On the courthouse steps where she had once spoken, hundreds gathered by mid-morning. By noon, thousands filled the square. They carried candles even in daylight, their flames flickering defiantly against the bright sun. Marcus Hall stood at the front, holding Grace's hand. Reporters crowded him, microphones flashing like weapons. "Mr. Hall, do you condone this uprising?" one asked. Marcus answered without hesitation. "This isn't an uprising. It's a remembering. Eleanor taught us that justice is not fear in robes. Justice is love in action. That truth can't be locked away." Grace tugged his arm and whispered into a microphone. She said flowers grow even in the dark. "So don't be scared." The crowd erupted in cheers, the child's voice cutting through their despair like sunlight breaking through clouds. Inside the holding facility, Eleanor sat alone in a dim cell, the cold metal bench pressed against her back. But her mind wandered beyond walls. She imagined the chants outside, the steady rhythm of voices calling her name. In her heart, she whispered back, "Stand tall. I am with you, even here." A guard passed by, muttering under his breath, "Never seen anything like this. Whole city's awake." Eleanor smiled faintly. That was enough to keep her spirit unbroken. Meanwhile, across the nation, scenes unfolded that astonished even seasoned journalists. In Detroit, factory workers shut down assembly lines, holding signs, "Justice must dance again." In Houston, nurses walked out in scrubs, chanting softly in hospital courtyards. In San Francisco, students covered campus walls with murals of flowers breaking through chains. What had begun as one judge's choice was now a symphony of resistance, each note carried by ordinary people daring to believe in extraordinary love. Back at the square, tension escalated. Authorities erected barricades, warning the crowd to disperse. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "This gathering is unauthorized. Disperse immediately or face consequences." The crowd wavered, fear rippling through. But then, an elderly woman stepped forward. She lifted a single candle high above her head and spoke, her voice trembling yet fierce. "We are not leaving." "Because justice cannot leave. We will stand, and we will sing." Her song began softly, a hymn of hope older than memory. Within moments, thousands joined in, their voices weaving together in defiance. Marcus closed his eyes, holding Grace close as the hymn swelled. "Eleanor," he whispered, "you are not alone. They cannot cage this sound," and indeed they could not, for even the guards on the courthouse steps shifted uneasily, their stern faces faltering as the chorus wrapped around them. Inside her cell, Eleanor felt the vibrations in the walls, distant but undeniable. She pressed her hand against the cold stone and whispered, "Yes, I hear you." By sunset, the square had become a sea of candles, a living monument to resilience. What was meant to be a display of power had turned into a testament of unity. The authorities could not decide their next move, to escalate and risk inflaming the movement further, or to retreat and appear weak. For the people, the choice was clear. They would not move. They would not yield. And as night fell, one truth became undeniable. The flower Eleanor had planted was no longer hers alone. It had rooted itself into a nation's soul. Night settled heavy over the city, but the square glowed like a constellation. Thousands of candles flickered, their light reflected in windows and rivers, in the eyes of strangers who now felt like kin. Inside government offices nearby, tension boiled. Officials crowded around a long mahogany table, their voices sharp and anxious. "We cannot let this continue. It will spread," one snapped. "Then break them apart," another insisted. But an older member shook his head gravely. "Strike too hard, and you make her a martyr. Strike too soft, and love itself becomes law." They sat in silence, haunted by the truth. Every move risked making Eleanor Price stronger. Meanwhile, in her dim cell, Eleanor sat upright, her cane resting across her lap like a staff. A single bulb hummed overhead. She closed her eyes, whispering words that carried far beyond the walls. Do not fear the dark. It is only the canvas where the light paints its boldest strokes. Her heart ached for Marcus and Grace. Would they be safe in the crowd? Would they forgive her if the outcome turned grim? Suddenly, a faint melody drifted through the barred window, the hymn from the square, carried on night air. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, tears slipping free, even caged. She was not alone. Marcus, standing at the barricade, felt his phone buzz. It was a message from a friend inside the council chambers. They are split. Some want to crush the movement tonight. Others argue for negotiation. The next hours decide everything. He turned to the crowd, voice steady despite the fear in his gut. They want us to falter. They want us to scatter. But every candle here is a promise. Don't let it go out. Grace lifted her flower drawing high, shouting, "We are the garden! Gardens don't run from storms!" The crowd roared, their chant rising once again. "Love stronger than fear!" Inside her cell, Eleanor whispered the words along with them. For a moment, it felt as if the walls themselves trembled with the rhythm. A guard passing by paused, his face conflicted. "Why do they risk everything for you?" he asked quietly. Eleanor met his eyes with calm intensity. "They're not here for me. They're here for themselves, for the part of them that refuses to die in silence. Love is simply reminding them of who they are." The guard said nothing. But later, he lingered outside her door longer than duty required, as though guarding not a prisoner, but a flame. As midnight approached, the city braced. Rumors flew, trucks lined on the edge of town, riot units waiting for orders. Some in the square clutched each other, whispering prayers. Others stood taller, candles high, as if daring the storm to break upon them. Marcus held Grace close, whispering, "Whatever comes, we stand." And in her cell, Eleanor repeated the same vow, "Whatever comes, we stand." Then at 12:01 a.m., the decision came. Sirens wailed in the distance, echoing through narrow streets. The sound grew louder, closer, until blue lights painted the night. The square hushed, every breath caught in fragile suspense. Would the garden be torn apart, or would the storm pass them by? No one yet knew, but one truth glowed undeniable in that sea of firelight. Even if fear marched with shields and batons, love had already claimed the night. The sirens grew louder until they swallowed the night. Blue and red lights painted the buildings, turning every brick into a warning. Lines of armored vehicles crept into the square, their engines grinding like thunder. Helmets glinted beneath floodlights, shields locked into place. Batons beat against plastic in a steady rhythm. A war drum meant to scatter hearts, but the people did not scatter. They stood shoulder to shoulder, each candle lifted like a defiant star. Children clutched drawings of flowers. Elders linked arms in quiet prayer, and at the center stood Marcus, holding Grace high so she could see above the barricades. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "The storm is here." "Yes," Marcus answered, his jaw set. "But so are we." Inside her cell, Eleanor Price could hear the rumble through the walls. She knew what it meant. "They are coming for them," she murmured. Her hands tightened on her cane, heart pounding with helpless fury. A guard passed by, pausing at her door. "They're surrounding the square," he said quietly. Almost regretfully, Eleanor met his gaze. "Then tonight, the world decides what it believes in, fear or love." Back outside, a commanding voice boomed through a megaphone. "This gathering is unlawful. You have 3 minutes to disperse." A hush fell. Some wept, some trembled, but none moved. Instead, the elderly woman who had lifted her candle the night before stepped forward once more. She raised her flame higher and began to sing. The same hymn of hope, fragile, trembling but unmistakably alive. Marcus took Grace's hand and joined. One by one, the voices rose. A tide of sound swelled against the looming shields. "What?" began as a single quivering note, became a chorus of thousands. The commander barked an order. Shields advanced. The first line of officers pressed forward, their boots pounding in unison. Tension snapped through the air like lightning. And then, it happened. A young officer at the front faltered. His eyes darted across the sea of faces. The children, the candles, the trembling song. He lowered his baton. The officer behind him shouted, "Hold the line!" But instead, the young man dropped his shield onto the ground with a loud crack. Gasps swept the square. For a moment, everything froze. Then another officer hesitated and followed, setting his shield down too, and then another. Within seconds, a ripple spread, dozens, then hundreds of shields lowered. Batons cast aside. The war drum fell silent. Inside the holding facility, Eleanor heard the change. The roar of engines stilled. The echo of boots faded. Then, faint but growing, the sound of cheers. She closed her eyes, whispering a single word, "Bloom." Back in the square, Marcus lifted Grace high as the crowd erupted. Tears streamed down his face as he shouted, "They cannot stop us! We are already free!" Grace stretched her small arms wide, the flower drawing still clutched in one hand. "See, Daddy?" she cried. "Gardens don't run from storms. They make the storms stop." The hymn turned into jubilant song, voices breaking into laughter, into sobs, into chants that shook the night sky. The barricades were no longer walls of fear. They had become altars where love had prevailed. And in that moment, even before Eleanor was freed, the people knew. Justice had already walked among them. The sun had not yet risen, but the city was already awake. News raced through radios. Phones and word of mouth, the square held. The people stood. The shields fell. By dawn, the crowd outside the holding facility had doubled. Workers brought coffee in paper cups. Mothers carried blankets for strangers, and children drew flowers in chalk across the pavement. The night had not broken them. It had bound them. Inside her cell, Eleanor Price sat quietly, listening to the hum of voices outside. She had not seen the shield wall fall, but she felt it in her bones. Fear had tried to drown love and failed. The guard from the night before approached. His eyes no longer held suspicion, only awe. "They're chanting your name," he said softly. "No," Eleanor replied, standing slowly with her cane. "They're chanting their own." Moments later, the door swung open. "You're free to go," the guard whispered. Official orders would come later, but the tide had already turned. As Eleanor stepped outside, a roar surged like thunder. Marcus rushed forward, Grace clinging to his hand. When the little girl saw her, she broke free, running as fast as her legs could carry her. "Judge lady!" Eleanor dropped to her knees, arms outstretched. Grace collided into her embrace, laughter and sobs mingling. "You came back," the child whispered. Eleanor kissed her hair. "I never left." "Not really," Marcus's voice cracked as he said. "They couldn't silence you, Eleanor. They couldn't silence any of us." She looked around at the sea of faces, candles still flickering in the early light. "No," she replied, "because justice is not a voice, it is a chorus." Later that morning, the crowd marched together, not in defiance, but in celebration. No batons, no sirens, only songs and the steady rhythm of footsteps moving forward. At the courthouse steps, Eleanor raised her cane and silence fell. "When this began," she said, her voice carrying across the square, "I believed my role as a judge was to interpret laws. But you, workers, teachers, nurses, children, have taught me that justice is not just law. Justice is love made visible. They tried to chain that love. But love, once awakened, cannot be caged. We are here not because I am strong, but because you are, because a gardener's hand cannot stop the seed once it's broken the soil." The square erupted in cheers, but she raised her hand for quiet once. "More. Do not wait for leaders or robes to grant you dignity. You already carry it. Do not wait for fear to give you permission to live freely. You already breathe freedom with every step. So let this moment be not an ending, but a beginning. The weeks that followed became a season of rebirth. Policies shifted, not from mercy, but from pressure too great to resist. Workplaces saw reforms. Schools taught new lessons of courage. And everywhere, flowers bloomed in chalk, in windows, in gardens, symbols of a nation that had remembered how to hope. Eleanor returned to the bench, not as a figure above the people, but among them. Her rulings carried not just the weight of law, but the warmth of love. Marcus found steady work with dignity restored, while Grace became a beacon of joy in every gathering. Children followed her through the streets, chanting her simple truth. Gardens don't run from storms. On the anniversary of that fateful night, the city gathered once more in the square. Candles lit the air like constellations. Eleanor stood beside Marcus and Grace, looking out at the sea of light. She whispered to the child who had sparked it all, "Grace, do you see what you've done?" The little girl smiled, holding up her faded drawing of a flower. "No, Judge Lady. Do you see what we've done?" Eleanor's eyes glistened as she raised her cane toward the stars, and the chant rose again, stronger than ever, carried on every voice, every heart, every breath. Love stronger than fear. Thank you for staying with us through this story of love stronger than fear. If this journey touched your heart, please give it a like. It helps this message reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next story of courage, justice, and hope. Your voice, your presence, your belief are part of this movement. From all of us here at Black Voices Justice, thank you, and may love guide your steps tonight.